Now, before we start, since the topic is about post-truth, let's have a small, brief overview of what we actually mean by that. Now, the standard definition of post-truth is a situation in which objective facts have little or no influence in shaping public opinion compared to beliefs and emotions. This is what is usually described, this situation is usually described as post-truth. We'll get to that, the panel will get to that, and we'll be discussing it at length. Now, before we do that, let's take a very, very brief overview of what's happening in the media scene in India today, and then we'll get on to the panel. Now, probably the two game changers in the course of history, as far as media is concerned, has been the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg, and lately the internet. Both have had their own disruptive roles as far as the role of disseminators of information is concerned now. When Gutenberg invented the printing press, it actually democratized the whole process of not just information, but knowledge dissemination as well. And in its wake, information became a precious and very closely guarded part of life, because it's after printing was started that the whole concept of editorial integrity, journalistic truth, human rights, and many of the other things that we hold precious today came about. But if you look at the disruption that internet caused, again, I have nothing against the internet, I have nothing against the digital world, because that's a part of our life. But if we look at it very objectively, internet has been not just a disruptor, but it has also been a demolisher of many things that we carefully guarded during the course of the last few centuries after Gutenberg. Now, I'll tell you a brief example for that. I don't want to take too much of time because we want to get into the panel. There was a recent survey in the US on digital media in which about 2 billion page views were reviewed to see how much time people took to read a web page. Now, the result was astounding. It was just less than 15 seconds per page. 15 seconds, 1-5. Now, what does this mean? It means that people, a huge majority of people who go to the web pages, to the digital media, look for information rather than perspectives, knowledge, or anything that's considered sacred in traditional journalism. Now, this is, maybe it has its own plus and minus points. Maybe we'll discuss it during the course of this conversation. We also have something called algorithms, which editorially decide what kind of content you read on the digital media, which is, I would say, part art, it's an art, part trash, and part mathematics. Now, the problem with all that, the curation is done by a system which decides what should go in and what should not. This is one side. Another thing is we have something called ad tech, which is surveillance-based advertising, which drives the digital media. Now, I don't want to go on bashing up the digital media, but I was just telling you some of the few things which I thought need to be told. Now, let's get to TV. Now, you have these ratings for TV which are held sacrosanct because that drives your revenues. Now, how are these ratings arrived at? You have nearly 1 billion households in India and about 6,000 figure in this TAM rating business. Sorry, I don't want to take the name of any agency. One of this, any of this agent, take any of these agencies, the number is too insignificant to come to a, what you call a significant conclusion. Yet, this is the thing that drives not just TV ratings, the programs, it decides what you see on TV, what you hear on TV. This is the situation that's going on. Now let's come to the print part. Now I'll just read out something from the World Press Freedom Index report. This probably explains, this is about a global scenario, but maybe it applies to a certain extent, if not all, to India as well. I'll just read it out. A balanced and free and fair press can take a country forward. Unfortunately, journalists are going through a difficult phase. Governmental pressures in the name of regulation, bombardment of fake news, and over-influence of social media is killing it. Security of journalists is another big issue. Killings and assaults of the journalists covering sensitive issues are getting increasingly common. A journalist working under a threat is an oxymoron. Workplace harassment, insecurity of jobs, gaps in pay are other areas which needs urgent improvement in mainstream media. This is from the World Press Freedom Index report of last year, 2018. Now, this is the scenario in which the media is in right now. Now, I'm not just picking up the black spots. There are a lot of bright spots as well. But I thought I should give an overview of what's been happening. And before we start, I just want to tell you that we'll have a question session at the end, question time at the end of the session, probably 4 or 5 questions. The only thing is that we need to keep our responses focused and brief so that we can have as many questions as possible. Now we'll start with Sudeep. Sudeep, what would you like to comment on this?
Well, I think I should begin. Thank you very much, and delighted to be on panel with you, and thank you all for coming. It's a warm day. I don't know about Mr. Gutenberg's invention. I mean, he's welcome to his invention, and we all benefit from it. But what concerns me is when media people invent news. You know, when news persons, I mean, he could have gone and invented the press, as I keep saying, and good for him. But what really concerns me is when media invents news, and I think that is something that we need to be addressing today. I speak here not just as a biographer of a people or a person, but also as somebody who, since you took all the names, television, digital, print, and newspaper and magazine, I'm actually one of the first people in the media industry who did convergence back in 1999, 2000, 2001, where I actually worked across print, digital, which he trashed. We'll come back to him on that. Don't let him off the hook, ladies and gentlemen. But you're right, mostly. Huh? So print, digital, and television in media. And I saw a lot of it developing way back then, but how news could become trigger happy. How we started developing things like hot news hot. It's a phrase we had back in our newsroom, back at India Today group, which actually corrupted news after a point because you started chasing the same headlines and the same TRPs and almost like that, you know, sort of a Murdochian world where your very existence depend on how much you created and how much sort of fervor you generated among your readers and viewers and listeners. Let's not forget the listeners. And I must also confess, and Rajeev is very polite, he won't take names, though he did. He said TAM and then he said he wouldn't take names, but I will take names. I left India Today magazine because of a news manipulation situation. I'm on the record, I've said this before, I'll say it again, unless they take out an injunction against me in court. I quit the organization because I sat in on a news meeting where the main discussion was about how to make our current Prime Minister look good after the Gujarat riots in 2002. I looked around the newsroom then, and I'm speaking as an executive editor of the group at that point in time, okay? And the the whole discussion was about how to make this man look good. I mean, I'm quoting minutes of the news meeting. And I looked around, and I think I said something like, this is partisan politics. And there were 10 of us in the room. 2 looked at me, saying, goodbye, Sudeep, time you left. And the other 8 looked away because they didn't know where else to look. I left in a couple of months because it was no longer the news that I thought we would be walking into. I'm just not getting into deep speechifying over here. I just want to share with you some instances in order, hopefully, to carry on the conversation and get the discussion going. And I would like to stop, and I hope we can carry on this discussion before I pass it on to my colleagues here. Something that happened yesterday, a former colleague of mine, R. Jagannathan, made a complete ass of himself. I was a business editor of India Today when Jaggi, as we call him fondly, the Jaggi, is his Twitter handle. Send him tweets. He was then the business editor, the editor of Business Today magazine. Today he's the editorial director of something called Swarajya, which is something that our friend here could be talking about. I hope a little bit. But Jaggi took, there was this employment data, or should we say unemployment data, that came in from the NSSO, which is an autonomous organization. Unemployment at 6.1%, and urban youth unemployment between 17 to 22%, or 21 if I'm not wrong. And my colleague and friend still, we are still friends, gets on Twitter, and his first tweet of the day on this, the first major media response, is that it's actually a good thing because it shows more people are interested in seeking jobs. I mean, what kind of news manipulation is this? I mean, what kind of world are we living in where, and thankfully we are living in a world where we can manipulate news in that fashion, and yet, thus far, be under the tree, hosted by Mathrubhumi, and still we're able to speak freely. I wish dearly that we can continue to do so, but I am concerned that in various parts of India, maybe not in Trivandrum, but there are not places not far from this city as well, where such liberties are not something that you can take as much for granted as we're doing under the tree this afternoon. And that concerns me, and I would like to leave it here, and I hope we can address it in future. Thank you.
Sudeep, just to add to that, and I totally agree with you on, I mean, I'm not surprised at what you just said about that newsroom meeting. Just to add to that, I used to be the resident editor of the Indian Express in Gujarat for some time, till 2011. And I mean, I'd worked in most of the other places as well, from Delhi down to the south. But we had a very, very unique kind of an experience there. There were some reports which are not particularly palpable to the then Chief Minister, who's now the Prime Minister. Now, it wasn't that the organization, my organization, wanted to do anything to obfuscate any of the things that we were exposing day by day. But we did have a lot of pressure, not just from the government, but from many of those fringe riffraff organizations which were thriving there at that point of time, which are still there now. To cut it short, I was attacked. I got my shoulder fractured. I had to leave under police guard for some time, and our ads were cut, the revenues dropped. We tried to choke off the newspapers, lasted for many months, but we survived. And this is the kind of thing that's actually disturbing. It hasn't happened so far in Kerala, so, fortunately, but I don't know when this is going to happen here as well. It might. Now, I would like Shubhrastha to speak on that.
I thought that the discussion was less political, but now that it is, let me be very frank and talk about my own experiences. I will take names because now that we have started name calling, let's name call everybody. I was working at the Hindu. I was interning there. I freelanced for the Hindu for some time. And after I started my campaign work in 2013, and I was never discreet about it, I was told in no uncertain terms that my pitches are no longer welcome at the Hindu by one of the very illustrious editors now. And that name I would not take. because I would, no, because I do believe uh, in carrying forward the legacy of whatever decency I have with respect to Sanskar, Parampara and all that. That editor gave me a chance at the Hindu, and I think he deserves that kind of cover, if one were to say. My problem is not with, uh, the media per se. My problem is when media starts donning the role of becoming a politician. I have no issues in anybody saying that they do not like Mr. Modi or whatever. Obviously 2002 was wrong, and so was 1984, and so were so many instances. The Assam Riots, nobody wrote about it. India Today, in fact, was the only magazine which covered the Assam Riots way back then, when Shekhar Gupta and Arun Shourie covered that in detail.
No, that was an Indian Express, not India Today.
That was the... That was India Today as well. Yes, it was an exclusive. I mean, our book extensively quotes from Shekhar's work. The problem is we want to believe in certain things and completely ignore the rest of the things. The fact that Mr. Modi is the Prime Minister of the country today may be a problem for you, but is a reality for this democracy. It is a reality for all the other democracies that we are dealing with. My problem is not with why you critique him. My problem is why did you not critique the others as well in the same fashion? If you were to tell me that people came down, the editors and the media politicians came down on Dr. Manmohan Singh the way they have come down on Mr. Modi, I'm sorry, as a reader, as a viewer, as a voter, I do not agree. And if he is in a position of power that he is today, how many percentage of space have we given to the other side of the, of the other side of the aisle? I'll tell you how news is manipulated. We recently saw in the Caravan an exclusive on Mr. Doval's son's business deals. And it was said that it's undermining national security, XYZ. I lost interest when I read in the second or third paragraph that he was a citizen of the United Kingdom. Frankly, it doesn't concern me as a taxpayer and as a voter. Mr. Ajit Doval in his own right is doing what is required for the country. You may have issues with it. You may write editorials after editorials about him. But to chase his son, who is a citizen of the UK, to make a larger point on capitalism, to make a larger point on Mr. Modi is, favoring certain institutions and not, I think it's bizarre. So yes, there is a lot of media manipulation. And I also agree that while I'm not talking about the follies of the quote-unquote right wing, which I don't believe exists, we are sort of stuck in this crossfire. I don't have plethora of opinion or a multiplicity of opinions on one particular platform. I can easily say today that these two media houses are with the government, these two are not with the government. So there is no media in this country, ladies and gentlemen. We have politicians batting for their politics, and which is why disruptors like social media make it more organic, make it more democratic. I'll repeat what I said last year under the tree itself. Today, a youth in Chikmagalur can tweet and demolish your entire piece into shreds because he knows the reality, and his reality is as valid as yours and as 1.2 billion other realities.
As an editor, sorry Rajeev, I must point out here that were I to analyze this analysis, I would hold it up as an example of masterful spin, and I'll leave it at that.
Josy?
I actually agree with Shubhrastha on the first part about Hindu, because I too left Hindu because I thought that Hindu was taking a very high moral ground in the public space, but was not showing enough courage to deal with the real issues facing India, the kind of stories that people like me are bringing in. So I agree with the fact that whether it's Hindu or most of the other mainstream newspapers are all playing their games, and I think to me their end is not politics but their balance sheets, the profits. That's one thing. Second thing that I wanted to tell her, I would want to put a rejoinder to what she said, is that actually I was editor special projects in Times of India, and if you recall in 2010, 11, 12 period, I led the team which we really rogered the UPA government and all the other housing scam, 2G, all that. So I think Manmohan Singh was really given his due in democracy. I don't think Modi has got his due, and Modi should get his due. Otherwise, it will be embarrassing for the Indian mainstream media. And not politically, I agree with her. Not for political reasons, but for constitutional reasons, for the fact that we are a democracy. Modi need to be subjugated for the way he has been rampaging across institutions, across Supreme Court, across the statistical bodies. You know, this country actually probably mastered the modern art of statistics, large-scale statistics and data mining. But today, our data is a laughing stock in front of the world. We are being compared to China, and Modi alone is responsible for it, Modi and his cronies. So that is a debate. I agree with her. Most of the media houses have been playing politics because of the end products are, what they look for is profits. And the entire business of fake news, fake propaganda is not the monopoly of just the right wing or the Sangh Parivar. I think it has been used very, very consistently by the Congress, by every other organization that has been in power or want to reach power. What's happening today is that because our leaders across the spectrum are not able to match our ambitions for him and for us, his supporters start creating fake news to match, create a certain aura around him. And that goes on the one side. On the other side, the opposition, because they are lazy, they don't want to dig up the facts, they also create their own fake narratives. So between the fake narratives, we are actually, I agree with the real media is very marginal. And even some of those media houses that the liberals are celebrating, even when I open their page, I know that it has to be anti-BJP. Because those editors have detected that India's all the problems are created by BJP, which again is not right. But having said all that, I got just two more points to add. See, in the West, I think the real internet revolution, the first masterful politician to master that was Barack Obama. A liberal politician actually took advantage of internet. His counterparts did not have much to attack him or discredit him. In India, the first politician to do was Narendra Modi, and because Narendra Modi is a propagandist by career, and because he believes in great PR, I think he and his people pushed too far in creating a narrative which got so distant from reality, that today we are seeing that they're struggling to hold on to the narrative. So today they have no narrative left. So that is a trouble, and that is not because he's of the BJP, that's because he's an Indian politician whose only aim is to win the next elections, nothing more. So is politicians on the other side. 3 days ago, Rahul Gandhi, I heard him, I thought it was quite an undignified way of him to have met Parrikar, come to Kerala, make a speech where we very tactfully first speak about meeting Parrikar, then he makes a comment which actually is not what Parrikar told him. So I think politicians across the spectrum are doing it. I think we have a crisis. The crisis will stop when the mainstream media, which has systems, editors, policies in place, start doing their job. And I think we are not doing our job.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll live to my calling and play like the role of a third umpire here. My concern really is the shift in emphasis as to what is a fact. When you look at stories, a newspaper, when any of us reads a newspaper, at the back of your mind, there is a craving and there's a demand, there's a need for what you read to be truthful or honest. I'm talking of the reportage. I'm not talking of the edit pages, the columnists, etc., who are opinion-led. They are going to write opinions. One of the first principles that I got to learn in journalism was facts are sacrosanct, opinion is free. You can give any kind of opinion you want, but facts are sacrosanct. Now, what we have seen happening in recent times, and it's not necessarily true only of India, it's happening even in the US or most of the democracies, the stories are being written with certain slants. So, for instance, in Kerala, if there is an act of violence, there is a murder. The story of the murder is going to be tainted. The first objective now is, was he from the left or was he from the right? If you look at it from the Hindi heartland or where there have been incidents in the recent past, it becomes a Hindu-Muslim issue irrespective of the nature of the crime. That has become forefront. And that is feeding into a certain narrative this way or that way, which is, I think, perhaps it's been created, but it's something also, I would say, that the readers are clinging on to. They are succouring it. Just to add to what Sudeep mentioned earlier, see the transition from Gutenberg, a little bit of whatever I've heard from history and read of the media. till about the early part of the 20th century, the media was propagandist. From Gutenberg, you got into newspapers. Newspapers were driven by people who had certain
Who
beliefs.
had a mission and
Who
who
had a
had a
mission.
focus and who wanted to do some things very specific.
Correct, but they had their own point of view. They had their own agenda. In the middle, the first part of the 20th century till maybe the first decade of the 21st century, maybe a little earlier, we grew up into the system which is called the whole objective journalism. Truth is sacrosanct, fact is sacrosanct, etc., etc. Because certain checks and balances which we hold dear as journalists came into being then. Institutions grew, whether it's the Times of India or the New York Times or the Hindu or whatever else. How they function internally is a different matter. But they came to represent a certain way of thinking and presentation of news and stories which readers found to be, reflecting a certain credibility and a certain way that society exists. That has actually gone topsy-turvy. That has gone topsy-turvy with the massive introduction of technology into our lives, social media certainly. Today, your first source of information is either Facebook or Twitter. It's not, the newspaper cycle or even television. WhatsApp.
Now let's look at...
And the reason why I'm saying this is that there is no filter. There is no protocol which we had enjoyed in newspapers. You have your sub-editor who files a story, it goes to the chief sub-editor, to the news editor, to the editor, it can be held back, whatever, etc., etc. All those have been hit for a 6. Today it's instant karma. You have some information, put it out, maybe right, maybe wrong, who cares? And then let's get on with it. And therefore, it's become very easy for the political class certainly, but all other factors, whether you are talking of people in the entertainment industry or sports, they latch on to create a narrative built around that hawa. And the other thing which has mattered is that all media houses have become big businesses or aspire to be big businesses. So they are also driven by the need for keeping their bottom lines healthy, and therefore they will swing one way or the other depending on where they feel their side is buttered.
Let's look at another dimension. Now we have here one man who probably has the biggest morgue of unpublished stories in his folders. Yeah. Josy. And Josy, in case, just for your knowledge, Josy is probably the only journalist in India who has been sued for 2,000 crores. Let's talk about that, Josy. What was it about?
I'm fighting the case. In fact, my own career, I think, to the extent that is good of it, I think it also speaks about what has gone wrong with the mainstream media, because I have changed 7-8 jobs. At every job, without exception, I have been collecting stories that they refuse to publish. And these are stories about big corporations, big politicians, massive financial manipulations. My book came out of my frustration with my own job. And when my book came out, the Outlook magazine actually carried an extract of the particular chapter on Jet Airways, and it's on that extract and so the book that I got sued. And Outlook magazine, which is a co-accused with me, has actually filed in the court saying that they're willing to publish any apology if the case is withdrawn, and they haven't even told me.
That's without your information.
Without telling me, they never consulted me. So I am now fighting on my own. Luckily, the publisher is with me. Now, Jet Airways doesn't want the trial to begin because I have listed about 70-80 documents of the government which I'll present in court, and my lawyers 2 weeks ago went to the registrar and sought an early hearing on the case. I think it's not about the size of the defamation or anything, but I think what upsets or embarrasses me are two things. One is that, see, my book or the kind of work that we do is mostly in the government files. But even this government, which claims to fight criminality or organized crime, has not acted on Jet Airways, and you know what's happening to Jet ever since the book came out. He has been taking money out, and Jet is on the verge of not collapse. He's actually backing off. So that is what, to me, one of the problems that I have with the Modi government is that you take a very high moral ground on security issues. I don't expect the UP or the Congress to do anything, because that's, for them, it's part of the DNA. But while the BJP and Modi took a certain stand and came up, and we thought that, yeah, two things will happen. One is the political oligarchy will disappear to a great extent. And second, we thought that they will do something on organized crime. nothing happened.
We, Josy, when you say we thought, what
Some
do you
of
mean?
us, some of us who,
Some of us, I mean...
some of us, I mean, at least I thought, personally, I thought that...
I mean, you're not speaking for the media here.
No, not for media. Media is not...
Just checking.
Oh, no, media is not. So, no, I thought that these two things will come out, but both have not come out. Actually, both things have been really bad. So the case is not the issue. The issue is here is that to hide the failures and the vested interests, I think all sides, and especially the ruling class, I mean, whoever is in power, especially now that internet is there, the Modi government's activities have been more accentuated, have been resorting to half-truths and lies to create a certain narrative which is not the truth. Because achieving the truth of improving India, improving the economy is a very difficult task. It needs real visionaries and real reforms, which to do that, political system won't allow it because the present political system exists in the black market. They need thousands of crores of black money to run their parties, fight elections. And that black money can only come from the dirty corporates who in turn do not give you their money. They are actually taking the money out of banks and routing it through you. So if you see the last week, the Dewan housing story and all, what Cobra Post came, it's a very simple story, right? No corporate is giving money from his house. He is actually taking money out of the public sector banks that we all control or own or government controls, and he is giving it to political parties and others. So in that cycle, I think put premium on truth is dangerous for the government, for the political parties. It's dangerous for the corporates. It's dangerous for even media because ultimately the media is dependent upon the advertisement revenues that come from all these corporates. So in that, many of us might be left out of the race and we might be ending up fighting our own battles. That's okay. I mean, I'm sure we are all good at that. But the fact is that mainstream media per se has lost its credibility, at least the moral credibility, because they are also running away from the battle.
Shubhrastha, would you like to add to that?
No, apart from whatever differences that I might have with Josy on his political views, the story that we have been reading about, and I think hats off to him for fighting that lone battle. The problem is when we start ascribing value judgments to corporates in general, when we start saying that all corporates are dirty and that corporates should be completely decimated for India to progress. I have a problem with that kind of generalization.
No, but I don't think he said that.
Actually, the best of the corporates, like and especially the ones in Bangalore, are going to protect and preserve the democracy of India. The Assam Riots of the world. I'm not talking about those corporates. I'm talking about the corporates of the kind who buy up land and in that name they fake contracts. And today, thousands of our own friends and city brothers are out there without apartments and all that.
Great. So thank you for saying that, because generally the narrative, if we are talking about the war of narratives, the narrative goes that the media in general is very anti-corporate. But when it comes to reaping benefits from the corporates, they're pretty much out there to make the balance sheet healthy. Coming back to the core issues that we are discussing, this whole cycle of fake news, this whole putting all our expectations on one government. I mean, I've been an ardent supporter of the BJP government, especially Mr. Modi's government. But I have no shame in admitting that I do not expect Mr. Modi to make my country sort of great again. I don't have that sort of expectations from him. What I expected him to do was, and I would, both of us might disagree on our expectations. He expected, in his own words, a propagandist to do away with political oligarchy and crack down on organized crime. I, as a commoner, just expected Mr. Modi to cut down on red tapeism. I expected him to at least initiate a healthy conversation around dynasty politics. I had very limited expectations from Mr. Modi. So those who had over expectations obviously will have a lot of problems with him.
Sudeep.
Seriously, you want me to speak? All right, good. What would you like me to say? To add to colleagues' comments or throw up some new agent provocateur?
You can do either.
Okay, fine. All right.
Giving you a free hand.
Okay, the thing is that, I think I sort of loop in with all that we've been talking. 3 quick points. One from what Josy said and what our friend here said, Shubhrastha, is that, see, there's a third layer as well on the corporate expectations. But, we talked about the good corporate. But here, what happens when the two good corporates that you mentioned, the Azim Premji Foundation and the other tech billionaire foundations, which actually then fund a lot of liberal news, and liberally so, in hundreds of crores of rupees is the budget. In fact, one fund has 2,000 crores to dole out, another has 1,000 crores to dole out to alternative news, not as alternative facts, as alternative narratives and alternative news to what is being driven down from on high by the current administration in Delhi. And in many state capitals, by the way. All the state capitals, as we know well, are like mini Delhis where they love a little public relations going their way, and they are equally venal and equally strong-handed very often when things don't go their way. So it's not all about Delhi, it's all about the mini Delhis that we've replicated across the country. Having said that, so now Azim Premji Foundation and the other tech billionaires who now fund liberal news, which then goes against the prevailing narrative from New Delhi and the other capitals, then they're no longer welcome. Then, that becomes a counter-narrative. Then they are accused of stepping in to the prevailing narrative and distorting it for their political ends. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a gray area out there. It's a very, very gray area. The other thing is that I'm not sure whether with my opening remarks I sort of opened up sort of a political Pandora's box. That is not my intention, but you did rather well, even though that was masterful spin. I will say this again and again. But that's what you do very well, and good for you. But after 2019, do you need a job or, wait, I'm just kidding. The thing is that it wasn't intended to open up this Pandora's box of political discussion, but I'm glad in a way it did, because that is at the top of our minds. News manipulation, fake news, and the reason specifically, ladies and gentlemen, I brought up that employment issue, that it's not all about politics, it's about livelihoods. It's about, these things impact the way we live, we work, we love, we travel, we aspire to, so many things. Politics is in a way, a crucible, if you will, which offers a means for all these policies to act out in their respective ways. What about, I think media has a great, great expectation and a great need to be presenting news solidly for these aspects. And I'm glad which is why the employment statistics debate is propped up, because it tells you about how one statistic can be interpreted in so many different ways to suit political ends, and the media has to play a part. That is absolutely the critical thing over here. And media must do this, and I'm very happy that as digital, there is a digital disruption, but some of it is like gross and uncalled for. Some of you would have seen some very obscene WhatsApp messages being passed about Priyanka Gandhi 28:2 as opposed to Narendra Modi at 56 inches. I mean, the grossest kinds of WhatsApp news and views that is being passed around today. Absolutely heinous stuff going out there. So where we must, we appreciate digital disruption and so on and so forth, but we also must, I think, reclaim the core values of news that you were talking about, that all of us in our own way were talking about. And to reach out to that, I think it is good that we have beyond sort of the establishment news channels and papers and the sort of the mainstream news channels and papers, we do have a wire out there, even though we sometimes may think it's going over the top. You certainly would. We do have a scroll. We do have other portals and other channels, because they actually offer and many niche portals, whether in the area of environment or development or economic policy. Narrative is free. You say someone's talk is cheap, narrative is for free, opinions are for free. It is good that we have these parallel narratives out there over here, and that is a disruption that I'm all for. Unfortunately, we cannot trust mainstream media. We cannot trust establishment media. We may not be willing to trust the counter-narrative media, but that's all we have to live with, ladies and gentlemen. And so we are stuck. And a pulley for us, who can, someone switch my mic off. I'm Bengali, we tend to carry on a bit.
Josy, how have the newsrooms changed in the last 20 years?
See, I worked with IAS 15 years ago onwards. I think newsrooms have changed before our eyes and much before, at least in the last 20 years that I have been there. I think 2-3 things have happened very clearly. One is that the advertiser has become more and more powerful. So today in the newsroom, if you ask the owner or the editor who is the most important person that you should respect, it's the biggest advertiser. So when Tata's fought with the Times of India group and walked away of the advertisement, it remained as like a benchmark about the black mark in Times of India's history. I was in Bombay, I used to be in Delhi. So the editor at best today is only managing the various interests. He's not the editor. He often is a censor. He always protects the financial interest of the owners. And in groups like ZTV and all, the editor also protects and projects the political interest of the owners.
There's a lot of self-censorship also now going on.
So when you have an editor like this, the newsroom, the reporter gets up in the morning saying that what are the stories that I should not do so that I can be safe, I won't get headache by arguing. So he or she gets up in the morning with a set of self-censorships, comes into the newsroom and rehashes the press information bureau's press releases or some marginal stories. Other than that, there is not much of news activity happening in the mainstream newsrooms. How do they make up for it? If it is a television channel, they call a lot of guests and put up a big tamasha where everyone is shouting at each other and nobody understands anything. In that scenario, the editor or the anchor's role is to provoke each other. He's a dishonest man who is provoking all of you and making you shout at each other.
So I just thought I'll make this little observation of how newsrooms have changed. And I'm going back to your original thing about, Jaggi's famous quote, infamous Twitter thing which you put up. What is happening, the fundamental change which I've seen, I've been around for 40 years now, is that all opinion, your edit page columns or your other columns, your think pieces, emanated from news. If something happened, if the Prime Minister of the country was going to meet Donald Trump, pre and post facto, there would be a think piece on it. Nowadays, news is following what opinion needs to be projected. So if you're going and inquiring, or if your crime reporter is inquiring on a murder case, the first thought, as I mentioned earlier, is ye left ka hai ki right ka hai. That is determining the way you report. And therefore, that is the most dangerous and harmful. I just want to also make this very salient point that by nature, newsrooms and journalists have to be adversarial. In a democracy, otherwise, why have the news media? If you're so pliant, there's no need for us to be there.
There's no space for dissent even.
Yes. Then the propagandists can run without being charged of propaganda. No? They run it, whatever. If you are not adversarial, then there is no check and balance. And I think this is where the problem lies globally. Mr. Modi has not had a press conference at all. Donald Trump calls everybody fake news and of course gives them interviews also the next day and calls them fake news again. So there is a certain amount of, I think mainstream media as we understood it has to a large extent kowtowed to all those who are in power. Advertisers are paramount. Television has become theatre of the absurd in terms of news. The only kind of thing where you still find is social media. There's bedlam there, but you'll still find, because it cannot be arraigned. You cannot clamp down so easily, and therefore you'll find oasis over there, I think.
We'll take some questions now. We don't have much time, but yeah, please.
I've been called Master of Spin twice. First I ignored, thinking it was a joke. Second time I would not. There was a mention made of The Wire, and it was spinned as one of the doyens of journalism and all that. I'll just request the audience to remember that this is the same media house which orchestrated riots in Assam based on an absolutely fake story that they did on Dima Hasao and on the Naga Accord. There was no RSS pracharak, no RSS leader, so as to say, who gave any interview whatsoever to The Wire. They not just published it, they allowed the riots to sort of simmer for a long time. It's only when people like us came out on social media, sir, we busted the whole myth. Then the RSS issued a press note saying there was no interview at all which was given to The Wire. It was only then that The Wire started to act. And how did they act? They started acting by creating this whole narrative of how the people in power are trying to clamp down on freedom of expression. I'm sorry, if this is a debate about freedom of expression, then facts, as the gentleman here pointed out, are not sacrosanct for media. It is only about narrative. And I'm really sorry to say all the alt news or whatever these portals that are coming up, they have nothing to do with facts. They only have to do into feeding this really venomous agenda prior to 2019. And I'll tell you why. Because I remember in 2014 when we were campaigning, this was the time when some of the biggest scams in Indian history were breaking out. Today we are talking about unemployment. I agree that the government could have done a better job at managing the economy, but I'm extremely happy that we are not discussing scams. We are actually discussing what should be discussed in this country, which is employment, which is absolutely Rafale. When nobody talked about Mr. Vadra's, Mr. Vadra's intervention in the
just a
Rafale
sec.
was not
I
talked
think-
about by any media house, sir.
I think I need to intervene here because we don't have much time. Now let's go in for questions.
I would like to start with the moderator. Sir, I have seen
Can you put it a little closer?
Yeah, I have seen accusations being thrown at some media being left, some media being right. Is it imperative that a media has to have a God party for it to function? Because I haven't seen any media which is independent. Because according to some of you, one might be independent or other might not be. Then another thing, even in Kerala, I have seen, according to the change in the ownership, the change in the party membership of the owners, the inclination of the newspapers being changed. Very subtly, but yes, they are changing. I have read them, so I know them. And then coming to you, I'm sorry.
Coming to?
Ma'am, I'm coming to you.
No, you just ask one question at a time. There are a lot of questions. No, don't. I'll answer your question first. Then you can, somebody else, because let's give everybody a chance. You asked about objectivity. Now, I have my own views on objectivity, which might not be shared by everybody, but this is my personal view. I strongly believe that the methods of a journalist needs to be objective, and objectivity should not be confused with neutrality. There's nothing more dangerous than a neutral media in a democracy. You need to take stance. But your stance need to be objective in the sense that the methods you have used to arrive at your conclusions are right and are not biased. This is the answer. Let's go to the other question.
Apart from the apparent political divide we find on the stage, I would better ask because I won't dare to touch it even with a bass pole.
Can you hold it a little closer? The mic?
Yeah. But no, I am not getting into the political discussion on the stage. What I am inclined to say is that when you say truth is sacrosanct, my doubt is that I am puzzled. How do you approach the truth?
Who do you want to address this question to?
No, because the trouble is that when the lady introduced you guys, you didn't raise your hand. So it's a problem for us to identify you.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So, my question is...
I'm Ayaz.
Yeah. Because you said...
No, I said facts are sacrosanct.
Let me complete.
Yeah.
Truth is sacrosanct, that's true. But the tools you take, it is tainted by your own personal biases, right?
Correct.
So the objectivity in journalism and reporting itself is a illusion. It is not true. How do you, objectivity and subjectivity? Objectivity is an illusion. It all depends on your personal biases.
No, that now you've got into metaphysics. So that's very difficult to answer. Ultimate truth, who knows? But when we talk of facts, if there's a fracas which is taken place, a scuffle, one person has hit another, that can be factually determined. The truth may be something what caused it. Therefore, that is the challenge. If it is manipulated and presented to you as if it really happened, that is the problem. That is exactly what I am trying to say. And today what is happening is that you are seeing more and more of that being peddled around. That is the challenge. And therefore it is confounding even to the people who consume media. Whether you read a newspaper, listen to a radio, watch TV, it is, there's total bedlam. I can well imagine, when I read 6 newspapers in Bombay every day, diligently. And sometimes I wonder whether I'm staying in the same city and reading the same stories because they all seem to have a different kind of a feel.
Let's get to the next question.
So when we live in a time when most of the media is being owned by corporates, backed by political parties, and they come with biased news, what is the role of the online portal? Like Madam said about
Who is it
the
addressed to, the question?
To Josy.
No, I think the online space is providing a very cheap space for good journalism to be done. That's for sure. Second thing is, in languages like Malayalam, very clearly, the consumption has really shifted, and in fact, you have more viewers and readers online than television, and the least in newspapers, while the revenue is opposite. Newspapers have the highest revenue, then television and internet. So even the revenues will shift. So internet, handheld devices, etc. as a platform is where we are going to be consuming most of the information. But that is only a short-term relief that we can do journalism, good journalism at a very competitive price there. The real challenge before us, as far as facts and truth are concerned, is that unlike the US, where there are very strong institutions and institutional values and liberal educational systems out there, we do not have any of them. Because of which, safeguarding truth and flourishing of truth is a very costly affair. It needs a lot of money, a lot of investments, a lot of courage. We don't have any of it. So unless Indian institutions strengthen from the Supreme Court to the media, we are going to be living through this crisis of truth being distorted by anyone and everyone. And I also do not agree with many of the people who think that, with the Modi era, things will change. The next government will come, they'll step up the propaganda, we'll find somebody else emerging. This cycle will go on until we have strong institutions, including very strong independent media houses.
We have time for one last question, one short last question. Who wants to ask that?
In today's world where most of the corporate...
hold it a little closer.
Yeah, in today's world where most of the media platforms are backed by major corporates, what is the level of freedom a journalist who wants to speak the truth? What is the level of freedom today as compared to, say, 25 years back? Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
All of us sitting in the panel except Rajeev are jobless. So, and all of us...
I completely disagree.
You have a
These
job.
are this is a fifth of his blanket statements. By the way, I've been very kind to you, but I haven't
You
questioned
have a
your
job.
blanket statement.
See the main...
I have the thing, Josy, it's not about having a job or being jobless on account of a particular view. It is that, are you willing to believe enough? One is, yes, your paycheck at the end of the month, right? So many of us have lost jobs because of the views we hold, because of the information we provided. Josy is a living example of that. He's had 8 jobs in, 20 years, 25 years. I've changed a few myself. But not all of us change jobs because our stories have been held back, number one. Number two, when your stories have been held back, and there are many people who've lost jobs because of that, or they've chosen to leave because they can't any longer deal with a situation. Josy is an example of that. For instance, I'm an example of that. But I won't call myself jobless, for heaven's sake, because since I left a tenured job as an editor of a major independent, so-called independent media organization owned by a media owner, not by a corporate owner, but a corporate in his own way, I have designed my life in order to continue to be able to tell the kind of stories that I think need to be told. That is what we signed up for when we joined journalism, most of us. I know I did, I know you did, I know you did, I know you left. And it is something that you stick with. There is a price to pay for news, for propagation of facts, for propagation of the views you hold. There is a price to pay when you join journalism. There's a price to pay when you leave formal journalism. There is a price that you continue to pay as you continue this journalism as a parallel narrative wherever you choose to be. So I have a job, only I don't have to go to office. And so it's not... I think we just made it too black and white, which is why I was trying to introduce areas of gray in the discussion at some points. This is not something that we can sort of close on a debate.
Sudeep's argument accepted, but the fact is that if you want to draw the corporate salaries of the mainstream media, you better learn to self-censor yourself, and you better learn to accept the mediocrity of the editors, and better learn to know that the big elephant in the room is an advertiser and the owner's politics.
Okay, with that, we come to the end of the session. I hope you enjoyed it.